Welcome to another edition of Around the Table with Stacy Smith as we take a look at politics and what's happening as far as the political scene goes. Now, 2022 was a monumental year as far as politics go, especially here in Pennsylvania, and now we're coming up to 2023. So what happened last year and what can we expect to happen this year? That's what I'm going to pose to our panelists. I'm going to introduce them to you now. Former Governor Tom Corbett, he's a Republican. He also served as the U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Pennsylvania and also as State Attorney General. Mr. Corbett has a teaching position at Duquesne University and also practices law here in the city of Pittsburgh. Going around the table, we find Joe Mystic. Joe, of course, is someone I like to call the great philosopher of Around the Table. Joe's background is very monumental as far as helping Democrats across the state get elected. He also served as deputy mayor of the city of Pittsburgh, and you can read his thoughts on life and on politics in the Trib every Sunday. Also joining us is Jim Byrne. Jim is the former state Democratic Party chairman for the state of Pennsylvania. He is now the party chairman emeritus. Jim also served as the mayor of Millvale and also as Allegheny County County Council president. And Jim practices law now in the city of Pittsburgh. And rounding out our table is Keith Schmidt. Keith's background goes back to the Reagan presidency, and Keith also served as the state director for many years for former Republican Senator Rick Santorum for the state of Pennsylvania. Keith also consulted Santorum on his 2012 presidential bid, and Keith has his own consulting firm here in Pittsburgh. Gentlemen, thanks so much for being with us. And before we get too far along, I hope you all had a Merry Christmas.
Indeed.
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
Good.
Very quiet.
And we'll be looking ahead to of course, to the new year. Before we head to the new year, the question I'm going to pose, and Governor, I'll go to you first, is what was the biggest surprise of 2022?
Well, I think as a surprise, it's that the Republicans in the State House did not retain the General Senate, did not retain the House seats. They down by 2 votes, although at the moment there's vacancies there, so that's a whole battle that'll be over in a couple of weeks. But that was the biggest surprise, and I think that was due to a lack of leadership at the state party level.
All right, that's the biggest surprise for you. Joe, let's go to you. What do you think was the biggest surprise for 2022?
Well, I share the governor's views, but I have an even broader application of that. I was very surprised that the traditional Republican Party and the traditional Republican leaders abdicated their leadership to the far right in the Republican Party, and they essentially allowed the far right to choose their candidates in their primary races, which meant that they didn't do so well in the general election. We count on the Republican Party to be the steady party. It's a little more chaotic over on my side of the aisle, and they failed us in that regard in the past year.
All right, I want to get back to that in just a moment, but let's hear from the other guys first. So, Jim Byrne, your biggest surprise for 2022?
Mine was, as the governor discussed, the ability of the Democratic Party in Pennsylvania and the House Democratic Campaign Committee to flip the House chamber in Harrisburg. Our game plan had been to get close. The state party and the HDCC's plan was to get within striking distance in order to have a real legitimate shot at taking that chamber in 2024. The fact that we were able to do it in one cycle, and there was a significant gap for your listeners. I think we were at 88 or 89, and we needed to get to up to 102. We wanted to get into the mid 90s. Well, we got it. We got it all. That speaks volumes to what the professor spoke about, and that is this open civil war in the GOP. This is a direct result, in my opinion, of the Dobbs case, and then on top of that, the accelerant, the inability of the traditional Republicans, as the professor mentioned, to take control of their party and bring some type of order or focus on what's at stake to their campaign. This speaks to the fact that the Trump problem in the GOP reared its head in Pennsylvania. And until the Trump problem is brought under control by the GOP, these types of results shouldn't be as surprising to us in conversations moving forward.
Okay, Keith, your thoughts about the biggest surprises of 2022?
My biggest surprise is that we all have the same biggest surprise. I mean, it took us a year to get on the same page. Maybe we should end this early. But really, it's about leadership. I think the ineffective leadership and weakness of the Republican leadership in the party in Harrisburg really cost us. The top of the ticket does matter. It was a free-for-all in the primaries. We had literally dozens of candidates for governor and senator. We end up with a fringe candidate, a very divisive candidate. And to nobody's surprise, to the governor or mine, we knew he was going to lose. I just think we were shocked at what those negative coattails can do. And those negative coattails swept the Republicans out of control of the state house when we all believed, both my Democratic colleagues here and my Republican, all agreed that that really wasn't in jeopardy. We thought they were going to get close. They were going to gain some seats, but nobody foretold the switch of power. And so that by far is the biggest surprise in Pennsylvania.
All right, Joe, I'm going to go back to something you were talking about, and that relates to, you said that the certain wing of the Republican Party took control, and that's why the Republicans basically lost. But there would be those who would say that Mr. Fetterman, the mayor of Braddock, garnering the Democratic senatorial nomination, was also somewhat of a surprise in the point that the progressive unit of the Democratic Party seems to be taking more control.
Yeah, I think that was somewhat surprising, less surprising as time went on. But the message we learned from this last round of general election races is that authenticity still counts. John Fetterman did not try to run as somebody other than John Fetterman. And for some reason, you know, the public picked up on that. And that's why he was successful. He was authentic. And he was probably, I'm guessing, and in some cases I know, urged to appear to be someone other than he really is, and he rejected that, and it paid off because that appealed to the voters. On the Republican side, for both, well, I would say for senator at least, you had a candidate who really wasn't a Pennsylvanian. I mean, you could pretend he was a Pennsylvanian. You could try to make him a Pennsylvanian. You could show that some tenuous ties he had were enough to qualify him as a Pennsylvanian, but he wasn't authentic, and they paid the price for that.
Well, as the governor pointed out some time ago, we can bring up the names Clinton and Kennedy as far as running for senator from a state that you're not a resident.
Different times and different people.
Yeah. Yeah, one size does not fit all in that conversation, as evidenced by the fact that Kennedy and Clinton won and Oz lost.
Yeah. One more point on Oz before we move on here and take our first break, and that would be, I ventured this in a conversation with somebody just a day or two ago, and that Oz was really caught. He sought and obtained Trump's endorsement to garner the nomination, but when it came down to the general election, times had changed, and that endorsement by Trump was more of a chain around his neck as opposed to pushing him forward. Anybody agree with me or disagree?
Yeah, it ended up being pretty heavy on him in the general election because of a substantial change of fate for the former president in the closing months of the campaign. But in general, listen, we blew it. I mean, John Fetterman, God bless him, he's our senator. I wish him well. I hope he does well by Pennsylvania. But in my opinion, as a political person who reads the tea leaves in politics, he was a very beatable candidate. We blew it. We didn't put up a candidate that can beat John Fetterman. We literally had as I spoke above earlier, a free-for-all. We had no direction. We had no message. The party was fractured. And in the end, we put up two weak candidates, and we got what we paid for. We didn't do our homework. We didn't do what we always do best. We're the minority party, but we always look for strong, good candidates who could identify with Pennsylvania voters regardless of party. We failed in 2022.
All right, we have to take our first break. We'll be back in just a moment.